Islam and criticism. Someone has just remarked to me that they were very surprised that when they're at school doing the general history courses that one has at school, Islam hardly figured at all in what he learnt or was asked to study. This was, I think, in the 50s and 60s, and that was quite common then. Nowadays, with the multicultural approach, you would certainly learn about Islam and Islamic civilization, but up until fairly recently, you learnt very little. I think there are several reasons for this. One is simply constrictions. Not enough time. One starts off with the history of one's own country. It's considered important to do that, and what leads up to it. So, as he said, you might start off with Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. But after that, by the time you get to more recent centuries, although you once looked at ancient Egypt, you don't bother, for example, to look at 17th or 18th century Egypt. And I think that was the point he was making. Why not? Partly maybe lack of time. Secondly, I think was a sort of imperial assumption that whatever civilizations Oriental peoples had originally, at some point there was a big pulling ahead, like pulling ahead on the motorway, sometime, say, in the late 17th century, and we overtook the Oriental peoples, and they subsided into decadence while we went on to great things and in fact ruled them in empires. And even if we didn't formally rule them, they certainly had to do what we said for a long time. And in the 1960s, that was still the attitude. A lot of people couldn't understand Nasser, for example, why he was being so cheeky. He was looked upon as a rather cheeky junior, President Nasser of Egypt. And to some degree, I suppose, that attitude still lingers vis-à-vis Saddam Hussein, or the Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran. But I suggest there's a more profound reason, in fact, slightly buried in the consciousness, that for both Islam and Christendom, the other has been the other with capital letters. For the Muslims, whether Arabs or Turks, less so for Persians, they're a bit too far away, or Iranians today, the Christians seem to be the arch rivals. Perhaps I ought to modify what I said about the Iranians, because we look at the poisonous rhetoric of the Ayatollahs against the United States, not necessarily against Chinese or Japanese Buddhists, against the United States, a Christian civilization. Interesting. And we, you know, for both parties, that is the alien, or rather different civilization, which has been encountered, in fact, for about 1,300 years. And for a long time, until the 17th century, encountered technologically and on equal terms. In fact, Islam, for a lot of the Middle Ages, was superior in many parts of life, in sanitation, architecture, carpets, general luxury, standard of living as well. But the rivalry and the military contest are very long-lived. You're starting off with the conquest of what's now Spain in the 7th century, and the Arab Muslims were not really pushed out or conquered until 1492, the same year that Columbus went to America. As for the eastern wing, the Turks over the Balkans and the eastern Mediterranean, well, the Turks nearly threatened to roll over Austria and conquer Austria in 1529. They were pushed back, but they hung on to two-thirds of Hungary till the 1680s. The 1680s was, in fact, their last aggressive throw. They got to Vienna again, although they had no hope of holding it then. But still, there's this great contest. Paradoxically, in fact, Christians and Muslims are not so different as all that. Their religions are not so different. They share, both are based and springs from the Jewish religion, the third great monotheistic religion. They all accept the Old Testament. The Muslims accept Jesus as a prophet, not as divine. So when Muslims and Christians talk, there's a certain common dialogue. It's partly the rivalry of people who are interconnected. In a way, you might say that Hindus, Chinese and Japanese, their civilizations, are even more different, but in a way that made them for a long time irrelevant, or seemingly irrelevant. Their contribution was very indirect. What you can understand a rival who's right up against you geographically, in the Mediterranean and shares quite a lot of the same common culture. Although there are two ways of dealing with that. If you have a rival, a deep-rooted rival, you can either, the intelligent approach is to get to know about him or her, get to know your enemy, and perhaps stop being an enemy. The other is to either to vilify them and say, oh, well, nothing good ever comes from the Muslims, etc. With the result, there have been some astonishing preconceptions about the Muslims. In the Middle Ages, for example, lots of Christians believed that the Muslims were idolaters, that they worshipped graven images, sticks and stones. In fact, that couldn't be further from the truth. The Muslims take very seriously the injunctions in the Old Testament, and maybe given by Muhammad himself, that you cannot make any graven image. You don't see any graven images in Muslim mosques. You could say that was far truer. The Muslims, in fact, one of the objections of the Muslims to medieval Catholicism, and indeed to Catholicism today, I imagine, is that it's full of graven images. So it's very odd that was a Christian criticism of the Muslims. It's more just the other way round. But even as late as the 1890s, when Kipling was trying to imitate a common soldier, just at the time that we'd beaten the Sudanese, known unflatteringly as the Fuzzy Wuzzies, at the Battle of Omdurman in 1898, he imagines a common British soldier, an ordinary British soldier, giving a tribute to this brave, if misguided enemy. So he perpetrates the memorable lines, "Here's to you, Fuzzy Wuzzy, at home in the Sudan. You're a poor benighted heathen, but you're a first-rate fighting man." Now, of course, Muslims are not heathens at all. Kipling himself would have known that, but he assumed he was writing the persona of a very ordinary Brit. He assumed that an ordinary 19th century Brit in a Christian tradition would just think that Muslims were heathens. So there has been that sort of rivalry, and also, to some degree, incomprehension of Muslim civilization. This has been, one has been able to get away with that in spite of the spread of universal education in the West since the 1870s, because for a lot of the time we seem to have won. You could argue that the Muslim lands were genuinely behind, genuinely decadent, compared with the West, which was forging ahead. That is an oversimplification, obviously, but certainly the technology of the Muslim countries. I think the best thing to say, if one takes it very broad analogy, is the Muslims got sort of stuck in the 17th century technologically, otherwise, while we managed to get ahead. Now, and also, Islam didn't get, and still hasn't got, in large part, the ideas of liberal democracy coming from John Locke and others, and the thinkers of the French Revolution and so on, and the Enlightenment, which we hold dear over here, or allegedly hold dear. What is the situation today? The fairly unthinking idea that Muslims might be interesting but not terribly relevant because they're a bit behind us is going. There is now much more of an appreciation of the Muslim contribution throughout history to civilization, because, of course, a lot of ideas got in. The reason why academics in Western Europe wear black robes is because the mullahs in the Muslim universities of Spain before 1000 AD in the first millennium wore black robes, as mullahs still do. And they, in fact, had universities before the Christian West further north did. We pinched the idea from them, and we also pinched the idea of the black robes from them. That's a small example, but there are many others, irrigation, all kinds of things. That contribution in earlier times of the Muslims is much appreciated. And of course, on the other hand, sheer power, the technological gap is now going down. I mean, it depends, the Muslim world's big, it depends where you are, but obviously the Gulf states are really richer than Western Europe. And in terms of technology, they've gone from, very pre-industrial technology to the technological cutting edge, at least in terms of what they import, but increasingly learning to do within 40, 50 years. So awareness of the Muslim world can only grow, I think, in the West, particularly either whether a state is hostile or whether they're friendly. They are still our neighbours, and they're very important factors in the world, partly because of the oil, as economic and political partners or rivals, far more than they were, say, 70 years ago, when the Europeans simply decided what would happen to Muslims. The most notorious thing is the Sykes-Picot Agreement in the First World War between the English and French, Sykes English, Picot French, to carve up the Arab provinces of the Ottoman Empire. So the Muslim Turks were being deprived of the Muslim Arabs, but instead of, as Lawrence of Arabia wanted, the Arabs getting a unitary Middle Eastern state, they were carved up into protectorates between England and France. And it's actually from that, I think, a lot of the trouble now comes, from that carving up by, in section. But Muslims are then treated as, colonials, sort of slightly superior versions of black Africans. You can't do that nowadays. And you couldn't have done in the 17th century. It's interesting. It's the intermediate period.